Just need to do a quick, Joshua, can they hear me on the video? Can they hear me on the video? Okay. It's telling me to join audio. Good, okay. Great. Well, I'm sorry that I keep that back. I'm pretty far back. Can everyone hear me okay? Yep, okay. I think we can turn it down a little bit. Sorry that I had to cancel on everyone last week. My family's feeling much better. Thank you for asking and for praying for us. So, trying to get to my notes here. So if I could have a couple of volunteers come up, we have our backyard VBS this year, and specifically for youth, if you could go ahead and grab some of those. We're looking to sign up if you're interested in helping with the backyard VBS in any way. This is like a local missions. So here at Patterson Park, we have several families and teams that are going to host backyard VBSs either at their physical location where they live or a park near their house. And so really looking for the youth who are typically involved in VBS to sign up. You'll be either a crew leader, you'll lead games, you'll lead story time, whatever it might be, crafts, snacks, all those types of things. So we encourage you to sign up as families as well if you'd like to help out one in your area or if you're interested in hosting one yourself. A lot of the things that maybe would be kind of nerve-wracking for anyone who's hosting one are being done for you. So there's going to be a binder that has the whole week laid out. There's going to be trainings that we have together beforehand. But really want to encourage you to sign up. We'd like to get everybody who is going to participate in helping pull these off signed up by April 1st. So you'll hear about it today and next week. So please, we also have sign-up sheets up here. Sign-up sheets up here, June 13th through the 17th. So please, please come on up afterwards and sign up. Put down your name, a role that you desire, and then we also are hoping to put you with at least one friend or someone that you'd like to be with for the week. So if you want to put someone down or a couple names, we'll try to put you with somebody that you are familiar with. So that's the first part there. Having trouble finding my notes here in my notes. Okay, I'm afraid I pulled this off the printer before it was done, so I don't have my last part. So, I need another volunteer. Right here, Andy. Andy, can you help me out? Thanks. Can you go run to the printer and see if there's anything sitting there in the printer? My printers. All right. Actually, I'll be right back, everybody. I'm sorry. All right. Thank you for your patience. Okay, so since we lost a week, we're going to try to finish up today on gender identity and gender roles we talked about last time. And then we have a portion that we're going to do on a topic called intersex, and that will be at the beginning of next class. And then we'll spend the rest of the time on how then should we live given what we know and answering questions. So let's begin with a word of prayer, and then we'll get started. Father God, we thank you, Lord, for your faithfulness, your steadfast love, your power, your providential sovereign work over all people in all places at all times, and the unfolding of your work through your Son, Jesus Christ, and the power of your Holy Spirit. And Lord, we ask as a church that you would help us to not love the things of the world or the ideologies of the world, but to love the people in the world as you have loved us. And so, Lord, as we learn about these things, would you help us? Would you humble us that we not be people who are living the truth without love or are attempting to be loving without any sort of truth, but by the power of the Holy Spirit in us, Lord, we can confidently walk forward, depending on you to give us the words and to lead and guide us in loving people and speaking the truth, speaking that truth in love. So we ask this, Father, in your Son's name. Amen. All right. So let's do a quick refresher. We're talking about transgenderism. The modern conversation is on two things. Gender and sex are different. Your sex is your physical biology. It's the anatomy that you were born with. Your gender is an inner sense of who you are, who you feel like you are. And it could be psychological. It could be socially you feel like you fit in this way. And an inner sense. And so when someone says that they are transgender, it can mean a whole multitude of things, not just one thing. But at the very least, it means this, that there is some sort of dissonance or incongruence or not going together between who they think they are and how they feel or how they fit into society and what their biological sex actually is. So we looked at sex and we looked at male and female from a biblical perspective. We looked at, is there this separation of gender from sex? And what we found is that there isn't, that we're embodied souls, that God made us in his image, not just our bodies, but all of us are made in his image. Our inner sense of ourselves, our inner parts that are unseen and unthought of and inside of us only, and then also our physical parts. And that the modern understanding of the body and the soul being separate, or the body and this inner sense of who you are being separate, very much parallels dualism in the New Testament, what Paul was dealing with, which is basically I can do whatever I want with my body because my body is it's kind of indifferent to who I am. And so I can, in those times, I can use it to worship a false god. I can use it to for sexual immorality. I can use it for whatever I like because my soul and who I am in Christ is separate from what I do with my body. So today we're going to focus on gender identity. And we talked about underneath gender, underneath sex, you have male and female. Underneath gender, it breaks up into two categories. The first one being gender roles, or these we could call stereotypes. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. A lot of people, based upon a cultural, not a biblical, but a cultural understanding of what a man is and what a woman is, will think that they are not a man or not a woman because they don't fall into 90% of what American men and American women do, or how they think, or what they look like, or what they're into. And so simply based on gender roles and stereotypes, a person now would begin to say, hey, I don't fit the mold, so because of that, I think that I am actually a woman, rather than, even though I'm biologically a man, I feel more at home with the women around me. Or vice versa. I feel more at home with the men around me. The second category is one of identity. And this is more, hits on not the cultural implications or the gender roles or stereotypes that are out there. Gender identity is much more of an inward, what's going on inside of you. And so, as there has been with everything we've talked about, there's a vast spectrum, even within gender identity. And this class is merely just a very short introduction. But this aspect of gender identity poses a lot of questions. At first, we've been wrestling with whether we know it or not since we started this class. One, we've been wrestling with the question, simply because there are gender roles and stereotypes, simply because people don't feel like they fit in oftentimes with the biological sex that they were born into, does that necessitate that gender identity or these things actually do exist? Same thing with gender identity. Just because inside I don't at times feel or experience what I would call feelings or thoughts of what I think a man should be feeling, does that mean that I have gender identity dysphoria? And this is a phrase that is very common. So the common phrase now is gender dysphoria. It used to be if you had some sort of incongruence between your gender identity and your gender and your sex, you would be diagnosed with some sort of disorder. It was gender identity disorder. And we talked about in 2013 or 12 or so, it now is called gender dysphoria. And so what's meant by that is that you have some sort of wrestling inside of you of who you actually are. Now, there is a huge spectrum between those who have gender dysphoria. And this is a spectrum from who are you? So here's the spectrum, I guess. This is all under gender identity. This is all under identity. And this is what we're seeing play out in our culture right now. The spectrum starts on one end, goes to the other. On one side of the spectrum, your gender identity is simply whoever you say you are. So on one extreme of the spectrum, your gender is simply whoever you say you are in this moment. And nobody can argue with that. Nobody can disagree with that. You are who you say you are. This fits right in line with our culture's main mantras of you do you be you. Just want everyone to speak their own truth, discover their own love. And so on one end of the spectrum, is this you are who you say you are. On the other end of the spectrum, a real transgender person is one who has a severe psychological condition. How do you spell psychological? So when we're talking about gender identity, we're literally talking about this spectrum here that is playing out in culture. There is a large trans community who believes that they are vehemently opposed against anybody who's on this end of the spectrum, just deciding that they want to be trans when they want to be trans. In fact, there's a large trans community in America who believes that you have to have a medical diagnosis if you want to be considered transgender. And so even within the transgender community, there is much disagreement, much disagreement. But this gives you an idea of the spectrum that exists of people who might identify as transgender. So the best thing for you to do and for me to do is if somebody identifies as transgender, our first question should be, that's really interesting. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? Because we're talking about gender dysphoria and gender identity and transgenderism being a very loaded term where a whole bunch of different camps fit inside of. And so a good question would be simply, what do you mean by that? And seeking understanding. On this end, the psychological condition, it is where you have a medical diagnosis that your sexed body does not fit your inner workings, that something within your nature got crossed. And so I'm going to talk about several of the gender identities that exist, okay? So I think I'm going to list about 4 or 5 here. And it does not cover all of them, but these are the main ones for us to consider. Gender dysphoric trans. Gender dysphoric trans, and I'll just put this up here in no particular order. So I'll just call this gender dysphoric trans. And it has 2 categories, early onset, that's what EO stands for, and adult adolescent. 2 categories. So early onset and late adolescent, sorry. Late adolescent. So gender dysphoric trans means that this type of trans is that there is a dysphoria at a young age. This is where you hear people say like, oh, my 5-year-old who's a boy thinks that he's a girl and only wants to wear girls' clothes and only wants to play with dolls and only wants to do girl things, is not interested in guy things at all, or vice versa for a young female. Later adolescence is after puberty. So basically the early onset and late adolescence is just basically talking about, is this dysphoria before puberty or after puberty? In 88% of the early onset cases of gender dysphoria, where a parent will come to a doctor and say, hey, my child really wants to be the opposite gender or thinks that they're the opposite gender, in 88% of those, if they desist any type of hormonal intervention or any type of medical intervention, this type of gender dysphoria goes away after that child goes through puberty. That's a huge statistic. Those where it does not go away for early onset are likely to battle some type of transgenderism their entire life. So this is gender dysphoric trans. The second type of gender identity that is out there is non-gender dysphoric trans. Non-gender dysphoric trans. And an extreme example of this is a popular YouTuber with 5 million subscribers who says that this is the self-ID perspective. So this is known as the self-ID perspective. And this falls on the far end of the spectrum down there, that if you say you're trans, then you are trans. There are those who believe a medical diagnosis is needed and others who think self-declaration is all that is needed. And so the non-gender dysphoric trans are on this end of you are whoever you say you are. And what is required to become a transgender person is simply a personal declaration of who you are. This is a very, very popular view. Number 3 is trans experience. Versus trans ontology. I don't know how I want to call this one. Trans experience. So these are two types. So a trans experience identity will simply be you experience things that you would, people who are biologically women who feel like men on the inside will call themselves trans. So this is a trans experience. It's based upon your own personal experience. So whatever experience that is that you've gone through, doesn't matter. That experience is what gives you kind of in your own mind the foundation for beginning to believe that you are opposite of the sex that you were born with. This gender or trans ontology is opposite of that. It's not based on experience. It's where you believe that you are trans by birth, that you have some type of wiring that has been gone wrong, where you're biologically a male, but you believe that you're a female, and that you don't believe that it's based upon your experience. It's based upon the fact that this is how you're born. And these are all different categories that are important for the medical community, legislature, when they're talking about transgenderism and children and hormone blockers or growth hormones or anything like that. And then this one we're going to spend quite a bit of time on because I believe it's the most prevalent currently. And I want to say that one thing I've appreciated about some of the voices, some of the Christians who are trying to engage these conversations is how they continually put the emphasis back to the dignity that we are to treat people, the dignity that we're to show people, regardless of whether or not we agree with them or not. And it's been convicting and encouraging and challenging for me to think, okay, here are people who have views way outside of anything that I would ever think or believe. And yet, do they know that I value them and love them? I don't treat them as some type of leper. I'm not shaming them on social media. I'm not thinking with disgust about them, that these are image bearers of God. And so I think in this conversation, it's important for us, even though people have used these things to cause what we would say severe harm in people without much medical evidence, it's important for us at the same time to realize that behind every statistic we're talking about, there are real people just like you and me, who are in homes, who we don't know anything about their experience in life. And the church should be the place where there's not only that truth, but there's the love of Christ right along with it. So I say that because we're going to get into a topic here on a major issue in our culture that has been growing rapidly. And it's called rapid onset gender dysphoria trans. Rapid onset gender dysphoria trans. And for short, it's just ROGD. ROGD. This name is recent. Psychologists have come up with this name to describe the recent rapid growth, typically in teenagers, and only in the Western world, who have been influenced by their social environment to identify themselves as trans. It has been called the trans trender at times. And regardless of your views on sexuality, there does seem to be a great deal of evidence that social influences are one of the primary reasons that teenagers and young adults identify as trans. So here's an interesting study, and this is from Preston Sprinkle's book, Embodied. He quotes Lisa Littman of Brown University. Brown University, a liberal institution, not in any way. She coined the term rapid onset gender dysphoria because psychologists and medical professionals and sociologists have seen a massive spike in Western countries in teenagers questioning their gender identity. For example, the main gender clinic in London, listen to this statistic, treated 51 children and teenagers in 2009. There were 34 males and 17 females that were diagnosed as having gender dysphoria. In 2016, the same clinic saw 1,766 children and teens. 557 of them were males, 1,209 were females. And in 2019, they saw 2,364 patients. 2,364 or 624 were males, 1,740 were females. That's more than a 5,000% increase in 10 years of gender dysphoria amongst teens in the Western world. Similar surges have been documented in Sweden, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Canada, and the United States, the United Kingdom and the United States. So the first peer-reviewed study on rapid onset gender dysphoria was done where 256 parents who have children, 83% of these children were biologically female from the study, did a study, and they found that of teenagers who are experiencing gender dysphoria, here are common factors across these 256 families. Number one, few children showed any signs of gender dysphoria to their parents growing up. No signs of wanting to be the opposite gender at all growing up. All of them described it as coming out of nowhere, kind of being blindsided by it. Number two, their new identity, that's their identity appeared out of the blue. Many, if not all of their friends at school were also trans or on their way of coming out, and they often followed their friends coming out as trans. Many of them became more popular after they came out as trans. These students engaged in heavy online and social media activity, more than normal, surrounding their coming out. And coming out is a phrase used for, coming out as gay or coming out as transgender. You're coming out to the public. This is who you are. Many of them had other mental health concerns that were not being dealt with. In this study, 63% of the teenagers in this study had one or more diagnosis of psychiatric disorder or neurodevelopment disability. 48% of these students had experienced traumatic or stressful event prior to this. 45% were participating regularly in non-suicidal self-injury prior to dysphoria. 15% had ADHD, 12% had OCD, 12% were on the autism spectrum, 7% were diagnosed with eating disorders, and 7% were diagnosed as bipolar. Littman states in this study that the majority of the teens in her study, though, thought that transitioning in some way would solve their problems in life. And many of them became unwilling to work on their basic mental health issues before seeking treatment for their gender. Now, these are not conservative parents who this study was done by. Some have argued, well, what about these parents? Were they a bunch of, Midwestern fundamentalists who, would be against homosexuality and anything like that? In fact, 88% of the families, of the 254 families, were socially liberal. They favored same-sex marriage. They believed transgender people deserve the same rights and protections as others. Even though parental consent is required, parents are typically, so then there's another issue that's addressed here that we're gonna show an issue of here. So rapid onset gender dysphoria, there's been some books that are out now on this. There's a investigative reporter. She's come out with a book called Irreversible Damage. And it is on this issue in our culture of a massive rise in high school age people who now have rapid onset gender dysphoria or even younger. And it is trying to track why this is the case and why it's even more prominent in high school girls, almost 2 to 3-fold than it is in high school boys. But it's grown massively in both of those categories. So what's come of this is that parents who actually believe, that a person can be transgender has serious concerns with where has this come all of a sudden out of nowhere. And, they're faced with the challenge of a now high school student or young child who is either approaching puberty or has not gone through puberty or is in the midst of puberty and wants to seek medical treatment. So while doing this, I tried to find people I know we're coming from a conservative perspective on this. What does the world's perspective on this? What is being promoted in some of the hospitals? I don't know if we can play it. Joshua, do you think we can play it? Do we have? I've got a video here of one of the leading in LA at one of the hospitals. There's actually a whole department within the hospital now that helps youth transition. And this is the lead medical doctor explaining what she does at the hospital.
The work that I do is in the Center for Trans Youth Health and Development over at the Division of Adolescent Medicine, and I work mostly with gender nonconforming children and transgender adolescents. The research that I do, in addition to the clinical work that I do, is really involved with understanding what these young people experience. What is their experience as a young person who doesn't feel like they were born in the body that matches their internal sense of their gender? There's astounding rates of suicide attempts among trans youth. So about 50% of trans youth have attempted suicide by the time they're age 20. So this is a serious public health implication. So for those young kids who are starting puberty and have strong gender identities that don't match their bodies, those young people can really benefit from not ever going through the wrong puberty the first time. In older kids or adults who've already gone through their endogenous puberty, those young people have to go through a second puberty. Well, we don't even like going through one puberty. Frankly, nobody really likes it the first time. So it's very hard for them. It's much easier if we can halt their puberty early on in the process and let them be suspended for a little bit and then put them through the right puberty that corresponds to their brain. This is what we do over in our program. If we get kids early enough in the process, we put them on puberty blockers or medications that actually keep their body from progressing through that wrong puberty. If they come in older, they may be appropriate patients to go on to hormones that will allow them to either feminize or masculinize their body, which gives them a body that's much closer to their internal gender identity. And so I'm really hoping that people understand this lives in the medical world. It necessitates for some people medical intervention, and that's really important. And it has to stop being a political and religious issue, a mental health issue. The mental health piece of it comes from the way that the outside world responds to these young people, and adults as well, but because I work with young people, that's who I understand. And I understand the experiences and the trauma that they undergo because they don't have an aligned gender identity in the rest of their body.
Okay. So you can see there are several things to address, but that gives you a good example of the love without truth. If we are evolved, essentially, and have no creator with no purpose, no ultimate purpose, and we are an end of ourselves, then starting to tinker with all of these things makes total sense. And it does become the loving thing to do in someone's mind to help someone or relieve someone from any inner struggle they may be feeling. This is what we just saw on display there, is how our world kind of, we categorize them as the love without truth, where they're trying to be empathetic to people and their feelings, but without any base level of truth at all. it ends up causing more harm than good. Several of these parents in this study, one of the saddest things of the study that I found was that this statistic is used, it's a weaponized statistic of 50% of adolescents who struggle with gender dysphoria struggle with some sort of suicide. In fact, based on the studies that there are mental health issues going on long before anyone even considers this, the fact that we're going into, so here's how the argument takes place with a parent. Well, I don't want my child to go, I don't think it's going to be best for them to go on hormone blockers or something like that. And to which a medical professional will then say along the lines, and this is a quote in here, well, do you want your kid to struggle with suicide? See, it's either or, the either or there of how this is being painted for families is you either want your kid to struggle or you're going to affirm what they feel and what they want in this moment. There have not been a whole lot of medical doctors who have stood up because of fear of losing their job. But to my understanding, there are more and more people standing up to this type of ideology that is being taught and practiced in medicine. Many people, for fear of custody, go ahead and give in to this. But there's now a community of detransitioners. There's a growing community of detransitioners. These are these statistics of students who, at a young age, in this rapid early onset gender dysphoria, they were affirmed by medical doctors. They were given the hormone blockers. They were given the hormone pills to either masculinize or feminize their bodies. And then their whole life didn't get better. It didn't solve their issues. It got worse, and they detransitioned. And they've started an advocacy network called the Detransition Advocacy Network. The founder says this. He says, there are few studies behind detransition rates, but I can tell you there are thousands of us. Our voices are hidden because we are seen by the queer community as the inconvenient consequence of their movement. We are just collateral damage for the greater good. This generation is just guinea pigs for their desires. And the fact that scientists and doctors are staying quiet about this is criminal. In fact, the numbers are causing Sweden and the United Kingdom to reassess their early affirmation of rapid onset gender dysphoria. But in the United States, gender affirmative only model still reigns in our medical community. And many doctors are fearful to question it because they might lose their job for being viewed as prejudice or a bigot. Trans detransitioners is the kind of the last in this whole gender identity is someone who has detransitioned. And this community is really growing. A detransitioner are people who were so convinced that their gender was different than their sex that they transitioned in some way. Maybe it was just clothing. Maybe it was their name, their pronoun. Maybe it was their medically. Maybe they had a surgery. Maybe they took some sort of hormones. But they transitioned in some way, and then they decided that they wanted to live as their biological gender again. So they have detransitioned. And there is a rapid growth in this demographic as well. The Christian response to going back to rapid onset gender dysphoria is that clearly in our society, young people are longing to be known. Young people are longing to be known. If there's anything we've learned from social media, it's that people are longing to be known and liked. But when people are known and liked in a superficial way, it is extremely destructive. when people find their identity in being known by humans, fallen humans, and being liked by fallen humans, it ends up being extremely destructive for them and others. And so our Christian response is one of compassion, knowing that just like we cannot place the godlike burden of being known and loved, that only God knows us fully and loves us fully. That we can't place that on other people and expect good results. There's a compassion that we have, knowing that young people have a desire to be known and loved. Many kids have no place of belonging. This community here, if you go outside of this community or you spend time wherever it is, whether we go on SOS or whether we're in neighborhoods or you're in other parts of families outside of our church, you start to see that what you experience here is not normal, where people know each other or are known by a lot of different people, maybe at a deep level, maybe not at a deep level. But many people do not have the amount of Christian influence in their life that most people have if they've grown up here at Patterson Park Church. They're coming from a much rougher home situation. They've not experienced being known or loved by a father or a mother. They've not experienced being known and loved by youth leaders at church, people who are excited to see you every week. They just like you because you're made in God's image and you're part of their church. It's not because you're doing something special. They like you. And it's amazing how there is a deep poverty in our world of people being known and loved, not because they're being unique or doing something special, but simply because God has made them. And we love them because God has made them. And so I think for us, a Christian response is that we don't too much. We make sure that we are a place where we are loving each other, but we make sure that we're also a place that is reaching out and looking outward to our neighbors to know and love them, as they are, not as we think that they should be. As parents, we need to lead in conversations and topics and asking questions. Connect with our kids. I think we oversell in Christian discipleship, teaching biblical truth, and we undersell the quality of the relationship that you have with an individual parent or with your child. And that time of them knowing that dad loves you, dad wants to spend time with you, dad enjoys you, dad's here for you, mom's here for you, that aren't necessarily sitting down and having a quiet time with them or anything like that. Along this topic, I've read several stories of girls, specifically high schoolers, who had struggled with rapid onset gender dysphoria. And it was interesting to me, to those who resisted these peer pressures of their social reality, tended to be those who had a strong relationship with an older man or woman who did not tell them what they had to do, but they invested in them and they spent time with them. They had a quality relationship with an older person in their life. So I think we need to never undersell the need for biblical truth in our relationships, but the quality of our relationships. Sometimes it's hard to get along with your family. Sometimes, you can feel distant from one kid and close to some other kids, or distant from somebody, and or distant from mom or distant from dad. And never underestimate investing in your relationship with the people in your household. Whether you're a high schooler and you got little siblings, never underestimate investing in your little siblings. Never. Your little siblings are watching you. They are looking up to you. Never underestimate that little cousin. Never underestimate that, friend. The relationship and the quality of your relationship is as important as the truth. Okay. The mental health concerns are what are looked over, are what are used to diagnose gender identity. You heard her say it in the video. There is a major mental health concern. And so the thinking is there Are people struggling? This is causing mental harm to them because they feel one way, but their biology is another way. And so to solve that issue, that mental harm that's being done, we should transition them either sexually to fit their identity. It's important that to note that many trans people, especially teenagers, have co-occurring mental health concerns, sometimes several mental health concerns going on. And instead of addressing those mental health concerns, what's being addressed first is one's gender identity. Trans people have also experienced borderline personality disorder, schizophrenia, OCD, ADHD, as I said. According to one study, people with gender dysphoria are 10 times more likely to be on the autism spectrum. Another study shows that 26% of trans teenagers seeking a sexual reassignment, actual physical surgery, are diagnosed as autistic. It would be irresponsible and unloving to assume that every trans teen or person you meet falls into this category of, oh, they've had something awful happen to them. Oh, they are just being socially manipulated by their environment. Are those things the norm? Yeah, they are the norm, but we shouldn't assume that about any person that we run in contact with. Okay. And then this last part here, I'll check anybody got the time for me? Thank you. So, what does the Bible have to say about gender identity? The Bible does not have, is often causes too outdated to address gender identity because there is no biblical text to address someone who has an inner sense of them being different than what their biological sex is. But at the time that the Bible was written, there were some well-known and very public figures who were biologically male, yet expressed themselves as female. And so it causes us to think that this issue is not a new issue. And when the Bible speaks about what a man is and what a woman is and what their responsibilities before God are, it takes into account, based on the fact that we have several examples in history of people who would be now called transgender in the first century. In fact, and these weren't like non-well-known figures. As far as we can tell, the Roman emperor Elagabalus in AD 218 and through 222 wanted to be or believed he was a woman. The Roman author Diocasius tells us that this emperor would be intimate with women so he could learn how to act like a woman in bed, that he would go to taverns dressed as a woman to entice men, that he would also work in order to attract men. When he married a male slave, Elagabalus, I can't even say it, he dressed as the bride in his wedding, and he gave himself away as a wife. He continued to live out his identity, his gender identity. So does the Bible speak specifically to gender identity? No, the Bible doesn't speak specifically to a great many issues, but does the Bible speak authoritatively on all things? Yes, it does. In short, the Bible is probably more in touch with this topic of gender identity and can speak to it with authority than anybody gives it credit. I think I'm going to go ahead and stop there. The next topic that we're going to bring up, and I'll stop with a reading from Scripture, but the next topic that we're going to bring up is intersex. And I just want to give you a little thought here. An intersex person is basically a person who is on a spectrum. There's actually several different things that would qualify someone as intersex. Maybe they have an extra X chromosome or something along those lines, but they've been quantified as being intersex, which means they're like using that term to say that someone is 90% male and 10% female in their body, or 50% male and 50% female in their body. And there are these cases that exist out there that cause people to say, well, since there are intersex people, I used to think that there's only male and female, but then I learned that there are intersex people. And now that I know that there aren't just two genders, therefore, a person's gender identity is a more accurate description of their authentic self than their body, because we know intersex people exist. So if you saw in there, and this is what we'll be teasing out next time, is basically they start from sex. There are intersex people, people who are both biologically male and female. And since these people exist, they make the jump. I don't know if you heard it in the logic there. They make the jump to since there are multiple genders. They use the sex anatomy to jump to gender identity. And then they say, because there can be someone who's male, female, and male plus female, or female plus male, that therefore means that someone's gender identity is more accurate of who they really are rather than their biological anatomy. So we'll get into that next time. We'll just do a short little talk on that, and then we'll spend the rest of the time wrapping things up. I read this a couple weeks ago, and I'd like to just read this psalm again. Blessing, what have you, Psalm 1 as we close out. And just as a reminder of God's blessing towards us, rooted in himself. So let's pray. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He is like a tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither. In all that he does, he prospers. The wicked are not so, but are like chaff that the wind drives away. Therefore, the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. Father God, your Son, Jesus Christ, is the way of the righteous. Would you help us, Lord? Show us that the way is not to have all the right answers, not to win all the arguments, but an intimate relationship with Christ where he is our all, where we need him daily, where you are constantly humbling us to our own sinfulness, where we're repenting and believing again in the grace that we've received in Christ Jesus. Lord, humble us. Help us see where we need to turn away from the old self that slanders and puts down and judges and hates and is just unloving towards people who are not like them. And help us to put on, by the power of your Holy Spirit, who we are in Christ. Loving, gentle, peaceful, kind-hearted, tender-hearted, forgiving those as Christ Jesus has forgiven us. Help us, Lord, to see the many ways that we are swimming in your grace every day. And had it not been for Jesus, we would be blind and we would be dead in our trespasses. But because of your grace, you've made us alive with him who's risen from the dead. We're so grateful. Thank you for these students and parents, and help us, Lord, to walk wisely in this world where you've placed us. In Christ's name, amen.
Tripping on my thoughts and it's hard to breathe. I've been feeling all alone, but they'll never see.